I,
Hi, everyone. We are here with a special edition of the Educator Wellness Revolution podcast. And it's been almost 2 weeks since the election. And we just wanted to come to you and share how we're feeling, how we're doing. We know that it's been a tough time for a lot of people. And especially for our educators who are in the classroom, who are not only processing what it means for them personally and their own feelings about it, but having to navigate having these conversations with their students every day, with their colleagues, and that it's not been an easy time to do that. So we just wanted to come to you a little less prepared and less scripted than normal, and just talk about how we're feeling about it. And I think particularly as an organization that works at an intersection of both doing advocacy work, but also doing wellness work, to just make it real. Like, what is the wellness angle here? How do we take care of ourselves in moments that, we can feel a lot of despair, or anger, or frustration, or all the things. And how do we turn to advocacy, and how can advocacy also be wellness? So I'll start just checking in. How are you doing? How was the time right after the election? How do you feel now?
I think right after the election was really tough. And I just felt, I felt like hurt and let down a lot by the country. And I know that I feel very lucky to live in this sort of like DC bubble, where I don't often have to encounter like outright racism or any of the things that I think really fueled a lot of the election outcome. But I just felt kind of like distrustful of people. And I think that I feel a lot better now, having been in community and been in organizing spaces and feeling more trust than I almost expected. More trust in like the capacity and capability of like the city to come together and support each other.
Yeah.
How are you feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I feel the immediate days after more anger than anything else. And I mean, there's certainly despair and hopelessness about it. I still feel some of that. But I think it was just kind of like how could we, do I even know the people I'm around? And that's there, it's always there, it's not new. And in some ways it's very unsurprising given our history, but in other ways, it like something cannot be surprising and still shocking. And I think like there's been a lot of that in our politics over the past 10 years or so. And I think we were still hoping for the temperature to come down in that way. And there were a lot of hopes. And I think there's so many thoughts about what the consequences are, what it means for people. And in our community, I think it's going to have some really direct effects. But I think like it was hard to like jump right into what does this mean? And I think I felt like a lot of people were jumping into it, like, all right, let's go, let's organize, and I think both of us were like, hold on a second. And I think like given that we do the wellness work, like I think our team was very much like supportive of each other. And just taking whatever time we needed to take to process all that. I don't think that's over, but
And I do really appreciate that like we gave each other grace, especially like the day after, to take some time for ourselves and just like log off and just process. I think there is a dangerous like assumption that people can go back to business as usual. And I think also like for me at least, I'm like, I can jump into organizing. I didn't necessarily feel like I could, but I was like, if I have to, I can. I will. And also acknowledging that like whatever like ideas or like that like executive functioning, we talked about this, like sort of went out the window for me for a few days. I was like, I'm so discombobulated. Like I just, yeah, I think it was helpful. It felt really reassuring to see that other people were like able to jump in right away.
Mhm.
And I was like, I need a few days before I can.
Yeah, and I also know a lot of people that were jumping in right away professionally and
Mhm.
personally weren't doing well, right?
Yeah.
And just like, everybody processes in a
Yeah.
different way. Like, I think I also felt a lot of disbelief for a while. I was like, could this actually be,
Yeah.
was this real? Like, are all the votes counted? Like, is
Yeah.
this actually happening? And it's the stages of grief, right? It's like recognize
denial
that
stage,
going
yeah.
through denial. And I think, like I would just like, I don't feel like, I think the next stages will happen and we'll jump into organizing and we'll talk about all of that and still like I don't expect that those other things will necessarily go away either. Like you want to rationalize it in a lot of ways. And in other ways I have, in ways that I think are justified because of being around other good people, right? Since then that like, it still is half the country, right? And we are in a community, obviously, here in DC, where we're surrounded by a lot of like-minded people, but not just like-minded people, but both a lot of people who will be severely impacted and a lot of people who are ready to fight for them. And I think that that is something that feels good, even knowing what the threats are. Yeah. So I think like let's just jump into like what it is, right? Like in practicality, because I think like there have been a lot of questions about what this means for education and what this means for DC specifically. And I think the reality is it means there have been a lot of direct threats to education from the Trump administration, from Donald Trump himself, about eliminating the Department of Education, what that would mean, for example, for the 10 to 12% of the money that in our schools that comes from federal funding, which could really be at risk, but also it's special education funding directly. It's, would they eliminate the Office of Civil Rights that protects trans students, for example, some protections that have been put in place in the last 4 years that could go away. I think we're all worried about our undocumented students here in DC. And then, direct impacts on the Department of Education provides funding for professional development, for example, that allows schools to partner with a whole lot of organizations, including us in our work. And so there's a lot to figure out what's real and what's not, and we don't know. And I think from an organizing perspective, you have to kind of make the assumption that the worst things will happen and prepare for those. That's a lot to carry too.
Yeah. It feels, I remember when we were first discussing like possible contingency plans on like the off chance that this could happen.
Yeah.
And at the time it really felt like the off chance that this would happen. It felt like kind of catastrophic for me. And it is a lot to carry because you are trying to protect so many people. Right? Like it has taken decades, it's taken over, well, a century to build up these protections through the Department of Education for students. And to see them like, or to have to protect against the possibility that they could unravel. At least the infrastructure for them could unravel pretty rapidly in so many areas and arenas is a lot to carry and a lot to, trying to think like this many steps ahead. Can be.
Yeah, so I wanted to, on that note, just read a quote that I thought was very helpful from Brene Brown. I'm going to read the whole thing because I thought it was helpful. Because we talk a lot in our wellness work about Kaizen, which is the philosophy of slow change, continuous change, and that we are not trying to do it all at once. And I think that is super important right now because we're talking about threats that are pretty massive and we don't know exactly what the fight ahead is. But we know that it's going to be a lot, and we have to also gain the momentum of being able to fight and win some of these battles. And so Brene Brown posted about kind of microdosing hope. I thought that was very useful. So I'm going to read what she wrote. Despair is a claustrophobic feeling. It's the emotion that says nothing will ever change. It's different than anger or sadness or grief. Despair is tinged with hopelessness. People who subscribe to power over leadership often weaponize despair. They count on the people giving up on themselves, their work, and each other. I get it. I'm looking at people I know with suspicion. I'm questioning the value of my work. I'm wondering if courage, kindness, and caring for each other simply don't matter anymore. I'm desperate for someone to blame because blame is an effective way to discharge pain, and it gives us a sense of counterfeit control. The research shows that hope is a powerful antidote to despair. What's interesting, however, is that hope is not an emotion. Hope is a cognitive behavioral process. It's about having a goal, a pathway to achieve that goal, and a sense of agency that I can do this. Right now, the thing that is helping the most is microdosing hope. I have no access to big hope right now. However, I'm asking myself how I can support the people around me, the people on my team, in my community. How can I make sure that in the maelstrom of my emotions, I stay committed to courage, kindness, and caring for others, regardless of the choices made by others? Doing the smallest next right thing is hard AF, but sometimes it's all we've got. So I found that helpful, and just like thinking about like what, I don't know what for you has been like a microdose of hope in this.
Well, I think I want to come back to the concept that she just shared, that like, so like despair is a feeling and hope is a cognitive process, which is something like I'd never like that was kind of mind blowing for me to hear. And I think for me, it's been a lot about trying to figure out how I can support the people around me. It's been helpful. Like I feel more hopeful, like trying to create that space for others. And I think just seeing that like the work goes on, the work will be here. Understanding that things are not going to change completely overnight. And just on a more personal level, like spending time with people that like make me feel like myself. And like I will be okay if I have, my village around me. And hoping that others have the same supports as well, and trying to build that if they don't.
I really feel like for me, like helping our team try to be okay, it's been helpful for me personally. And I like that she said like the next right thing, little Frozen reference.
I was gonna say I knew.
But like that's kind of what it is. We keep saying like put one foot in front of the other. I think like everybody's this like awkward question right now is like, how are you?
And it feels so loaded.
And it's like, it's like so loaded. It's like, and then some people just answer it like the way they always would have answered, like, I'm good, how are you? And I'm like, wait, but aren't you feeling something? So there's that, but I think just like, I think the answer really is community. And it's not like, in one way it is to just make yourself feel like there are other people who are like-minded and who are in the fight with you and who care about the same things. And I get that like, that's, maybe not the way we are going to convince other people to shift their opinions or to prevent a different outcome in the future. But I think it is like where we have to start, because first of all, it does give you those microdoses of hope to be in like-minded community. But it gives you strength. And I think like, there's no way to go out and do that harder work of building together across difference, right, without having strength in that. So I think like at this moment in particular, it's felt good to just, whether it's at a very, very individual level in your personal life or in organizing, just to try to be around community. So I think the microdoses of hope, I'm hoping like, you said the like process of doing this and caring for others, like I'm hoping that for educators, being in the classroom and helping students with it, like while it can be difficult, is also a way to kind of process it yourself. And then, there's the kind of confluence of, like I have a lot of privilege, and we're talking about fighting for people who have substantially less privilege and defending them, but you also feel a threat to your own equilibrium, if not physical sense of being from these things. And we know educators, are balancing what they feel is the personal effect of all this with what the effect is going to be on their students. And we just want to like, give grace for educators to take the time you need to absorb that yourself, but hope that there's also some therapy in the processing with not just your students, but hopefully with colleagues too.
I'm thinking that, so we talk a lot on our team about like there's just a frenetic pace in a school building, and it's always like go, go, go,
Yeah,
go, go,
yeah.
go. And I've seen on social media, like some educators are like leaning into that, like that helps them retain a sense of normalcy. And I think it's also like there's a certain bravery of like disrupting that pace.
Yeah.
And taking the time to process for yourself, but also like for your students and with the class. And it is, we've been talking about how it's helpful to like plug into community at this time, but also like there's a lot of bravery and heart that goes into creating community spaces for people right now, and for young people especially, and really like impacted people especially. And so yeah, just all the props for educators right now that are undertaking that work.
Yeah, so as we transition to talking about the advocacy part, and how we join in that fight, I thought there was, one thing that it's been kind of running in my mind, and this is from my Jewish faith tradition. I'm going to read this quote, which is, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." And I think that neither are you free to abandon it is really important. And it's hard in the moment that you don't feel like continuing. But it's critical, right? To like, what is the next thing we do to keep the work moving?
Yeah, there's definitely this like impulse.
So I wanted to read something that's been on my mind from my Jewish faith tradition, from the Talmud, which says, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, love mercy now, walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." And I think that like that's been weighing on me a little bit, that like neither are you free to abandon it. We know ancestors have fought struggles that are enormous before us, and as daunting as this can seem, and it will be, that like we have an obligation, that like this is the cards we've been dealt. This is the challenge our generation has been handed, and there are so many people counting on us to not abandon the fight.
Yeah. There's definitely the impulse to like just put your head in the sand.
Yeah.
And I think that's okay if you want to do that for a little bit of time, like throughout the day. But like again, that's something you need to microdose too.
Yeah.
Because this work is long and this work is hard, and we won't survive it if we don't like take some time. For ourselves. But it's not an excuse to check out, or I should say, it's not an opportunity to check out. There's a lot of work to be done. We cannot do it alone. We cannot do it in the next 4 years. Which is the other thing, is like these conditions will remain even after the administration hopefully cycles out.
We hope.
We hope. But,
and the advocacy, I think like there's a lot of things to consider about this, and there's really two big parts of this to talk about, which is the threats to education itself, and our students every day in classrooms across our city, across our country, and then our particular challenges that we have here in DC. A group started with the idea it might be necessary, and hopefully not before the election, called Defend DC, which has now held several meetings, an amazing organizing meeting where over 600 people from the community showed up, and then a meeting with organizations that we were part of to think about how we start to strategize and work together. And I definitely felt in that gathering both the the pain and the resiliency, but also people being like, we're ready for this fight, and it's not new to us. Like that these fights are not really new to us. But DC faces some particular challenges. We don't have statehood. We are not in a place that's going to be protected by a Democratic governor or Democratic mayor having the authority to fight back as we wish they would be able to against the federal government. And we face the very real risk that the administration will come after home rule itself and not allow our council or our mayor to listen to the people, and and what we do, advocate to them every day for changes in our education system. could be mute, right? If that process doesn't exist anymore. At the same time, we feel really strongly that we can't voluntarily abandon our own sovereignty, right? Because if we see the threat of it coming, and we know the history of, not having home rule, of a control board, which dictated policy for a very long time in DC. And so we take that threat very seriously and it's very real. At the same time, if we pre-concede, I mean, that is the story of fascism, right?
Yeah,
is that people start pre-conceding their power for fear of their power being taken by others. But voluntarily giving it away is not a solution either. And so we have to stiffen our spines, I think, to some degree. And yes, thread a needle and navigate difficult terrain, but not surrender our own power, or bend the knee, right, as others would wish.
Yeah. I'm thinking about like On Tyranny, the book,
Yeah.
and yeah, rule number 1, right, is do not obey in advance.
Yes.
And so when we are taking the time to like plan and prepare for certain possibilities, like we have to do so not as a concession or as some sort of like conciliation. And I think that's really, really important. And I think something that gives me hope, right, is even before DC had we still don't have full democratic, participation in like this country because we are not a state. But I think even before home rule, like one of the biggest ways that people exercise democracy in the city was through education. And was through local organizing for education. And so that is something that gives me hope, even though both our educational system and our city are under attack right now. There's precedence for this being the venue through which we can really like create change, and we don't do that by rolling over. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that's like really been disturbing me about all the election postmortems, and everybody's got their take on it, is just this idea that we should abandon the most marginalized people because there are populations in the country that don't care, right? And we have to focus just on the economic issues themselves and not the protection of, vulnerable people. And I think just like what we're going to have to confront is we can listen to and understand people who vote differently or think differently from us without abandoning our values, right? And I mean, I think, we at Empower Ed talk about what our values are on democracy and opportunity and community and liberation. And I think, every day in our schools, our teachers are living that out through the daily way that they interact with our students. And educators do so much more than teach every day. And now there are going to be, potentially new threats to think about, and understanding the emotions that students are going to be coming in to school with every day. And I think one of the things we've talked about already is how are we going to step up, like had to be done under the previous Trump administration, but perhaps will be much more extreme now, to protect our undocumented students, to protect LGBTQ students. How do we provide sanctuaries to make sure that students feel safe, and that educators in doing that protecting feel safe and sustainable in the work that they're doing. So there's a lot of work for us to be doing. We had an initial conversation with our educator fellows last week, and I thought it was really interesting. But I think like there is a lot of resilience there and appetite, right, to get into it and to begin to do that organizing, even as people still continue to process it. What worries you most about the role that educators are going to have to play? Yes.
I think even under like quote unquote normal times, right, educators are taking on a pretty enormous caretaking role for their students, and sometimes it's asked of them, but usually it's like an internalized thing, I would say. And I think that role is going to be magnified pretty extremely. I am really, really, really concerned about student protections in this.
You talked about data privacy and things like that. Talk more about that.
Yeah, so like my background in school, right, was in like colonial policies, which sounds very like, for America, that sounds like out of place. But a lot of our policies, and a lot of the ways that we come after vulnerable populations is pretty clearly delineated from colonial policies, and that is still the case in things like data protection. Yeah, protecting student rights, protecting student data. There's gonna be, my concern, right, is about a lot of this like predictive policing and things like that, where we are using student data, private information in order to target them, and using probably school infrastructures to do so.
Yeah.
So for example, like student records, things that should be like closed, right? Closed to the public, closed to departments that are not education agencies. I'm concerned that that will be weaponized.
Yeah.
And for so many students, right, school is their safe spot. It's their safe place. We were literally just hearing from an educator the other day talk about that. How scared she felt like hearing that, like a student was like, oh, we're safe at school, nothing bad can happen here.
Yeah.
And so just, I think like, yeah, seeing those systems get weaponized.
Yeah.
Or like the fear of that happening, because we've seen it a lot of times throughout history, that's a huge concern for me. I know that's a big concern for a lot of the teachers that we've spoken to. And we have had for better and for worse, we've had recently like this hyper focus on documenting, so which helps us a lot when we're servicing students.
Yeah.
Also can become a point of vulnerability.
Yeah. 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 And I think just like, while we're, just talking about that fear factor, while we have a lot of fears as adults, I think it's important to think about, like, just like we don't want to pre-concede on these advocacy fights, we also don't want to pre-instill fear, right, in all of our students about all these things that could potentially happen and may not. And we have to think about them and think about how our educators are going to, be in service of protecting our students, how our schools are going to do it, but not to put this all on educators, how our system is going to do it, how our city is going to do it, without giving them all that fear ahead of time. Well, for them to continue to believe that school is a safe place for them, but also for ourselves to prepare that it could be less safe, and right, how do we feel honest in telling them that it is going to continue to be a safe space for them. Yeah, and I think when it comes to the advocacy work ahead, we'll talk about a lot of avenues to be involved. We will share, along with this podcast, a link to sign up for Defend DC, and we plan to start an education-specific group that people can sign up for and get involved in the advocacy. And we also know that people have to find the right avenue, right, to be involved, just like we, microdose hope and try to counter the feelings of despair. We find the right way for us to be involved in the right time, in the right moment for that. And one thing is we always invite educators to do is to find that right space, whether you have 5 minutes to give or 5 hours to give, or 10 hours to give every month, that you find the space that you can plug in. And I think in Empower Ed, we provide a couple of things, which is one, being in community with each other based on common values and being in the fight to make change together. And also the very real possibility of bringing your voices as educators directly to our leaders. And I will say, one thing that we are going to make sure that we do in these fights is not just not preconcede them, but go on with the work that we are doing too, not distract all of ourselves with the potential threats, but move on with the work that we are planning to do already around enhancing experiential learning for students, around teacher retention, right, around addressing root causes like housing insecurity, that all of that work continues to be important. And I think one message I want to share here is that I think in the immediate few days after the election, I was feeling like, is our work even important in the scheme of things? And I think it's important for everybody, whether you're an educator in the classroom, whether you're supporting schools, or whatever your role may be in the education ecosystem, that our work is incredibly important day to day, and that also it is, in a way, giving over to that tyranny to stop from the work that we planned on doing, right? That we wanted to continue to do, that it is also an act of resistance to just keep on towards the goals that you have set your sight on already. My favorite quote is Martin Luther King Jr.'s quote about our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter. And I think we can process in silence. We can take more moments of silence when we need them. But again, feeling free to desist from the work and feeling that we do have the obligation to continue to speak out. And in whatever way you can find to do that matters and is important, small or large, in your context or in a larger context, and that we are here to help people do that.
Yeah. And I think it helps as well that a lot of the things that we are fighting for are things that are actively going to create those like microdoses of hope for students, for educators, for families. You know, like this work has been around, this work continues. Yeah, I feel very grateful that this is, you know, the work we get to do right now. That in our job, at least, like, we are not asked to put our heads down in the sand.
So we hope you all give yourselves, each other, the grace to continue to do that. And when you are ready, we are here to be a home for you to get involved in the fight, and to find community, to continue to do this work together. And we appreciate you just listening to us digest and process and talk about all these things. And we will be back next week with a regular episode of the Educator Wellness Revolution podcast. Thank you all.
Thank you.